play this by ear. You know what I mean?
Right.
I don't know how well you can hear it or how well anybody can hear it, but
Oh, it's good to go.
The shoreline of
yeah, dude, it looks
My name
dope.
is Muriel Baker, and I'm here.
It's giving off a real like Empire from Star Wars kind of vibe with that lighting.
Yeah, and I don't remember what this lady on the left's name is, but she's really, really good. She's been the last few, at least I feel like, for the launches that were happening in New Zealand.
We are keeping a close eye on the upper wind levels over LC2. Right now, they are trending red for launch, and if they remain that way, our operations team will likely go into a hold. But
damn it,
have a 2-hour
that's not what I want to hear.
Today.
I was wondering that too. I was just like, I really wonder. I was like, should I wait for like a half hour into the launch like start when they actually do the go for launch like sequence and then kick it off? Because like I don't want to be waiting here for like 3 hours.
Right.
Much work goes into the preparation and
but we'll see.
For our team and for our customers.
But I'm curious, man, like have you continued to up your position, or are you like me, you're just like cautiously waiting?
I mean, yes and no. I haven't added in I think the last month or so. I mean, right now it's sitting around 2% of the total portfolio. So I mean, with everything that's going on and the liabilities they have, I think they've got what 333 or so odd million in cash or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's just like I kind of want to play the waiting game the next couple quarters, see what it does. I mean, it's going to get to a point where just to keep the percentage up that I currently have allocated to it, I'll probably buy here and there, kind of like what I'm doing with Palantir.
Yeah.
But I just want to wait a little longer.
Yeah.
See if anything shakes out.
Nah, I hear you. Like I think there was some consolidation that I did a couple months ago, and so I added some to it, and I think I got it to a size that I'm pretty comfortable with. I want to say I'm close to like, what am I, like 2,500 shares? So I think at the time when it was like $6-7 that I had added to it, I think it was around 15,000 or like $12,000, and I was like, that's good enough for me. So it's like, I think like you, it's a little bit less than 2% or of the portfolio, because my portfolio shrunk pretty considerably over the last year, but it kind of makes me just a little bit excited. I think it's a good opportunity, man. But I'm with you. Like that's one of the things I was looking at in the investor presentation, the investor day, and it was like, ooh, $300 some million in cash. I'm like, if we don't get that cash flow up, which obviously, this is a big piece of it, right? Being able to increase the frequency of launch and stuff of the like from Virginia, then I'm like, when and how do you go out for capital, right? And especially in an environment like this, which I probably is what some of the big drag on the stock has been, right? It's like, well, if you run out of cash, you're going to have to go out to the market, and, you're going to be going out. It's not a very, I guess, cash flow intense, or it's not a very cash flow positive company. So what kind of rates would they get, right? And probably not very favorable, I guess, is the kind of question. So I'm sure that's been a pretty big drag on the company.
I think that's a lot of it, and then too, just the fact that they did indeed go the SPAC route. I think a lot of that created some bad press for them. That's going to take a while to get through. I mean, I think another big thing is I don't think a lot of people understand that it's not just a launch company. If it was just a launch company, it probably would cease to exist in a few years, just because of the amount of competition that's coming online. But I mean, the majority of their revenue comes from space systems, whether that's space components and other launches, satellites and themselves. Like it's a lot to the business that I don't think a lot of people give it credit for.
Well, that's what I'm like 95% sure you're the reason why I got invested in the company, is because like I think you mentioned something about RKLB, and I'd heard of RKLB before, right? I just didn't recognize that it was like a actual public investable company. And I think I invested in VAGC, the Vector Acquisition Group.
It was like VACQ, something weird.
Something like that. And so I was like, okay, cool. And so I'm pretty sure, like 95% sure you're the one that was just like, hey, like you should look at this one. Because I think at the time a lot of space stocks were getting like really like SpaceX was getting continuously upvalued from their private investments from multiple different venture capital firms.
Right.
Astra went public, like all these different space companies were really starting to kind of come into their own. And you were like, well, the only one I really like is Rocket Lab. It's like, I have heard of that one before, and I had like I didn't know too much about it, and so I dove deeper into it, and that was really like the key driver for me. And when I initially invested, it was thinking for me specifically, I was investing strictly for launch. The way I was looking at it was specifically, okay, you have SpaceX, which is going to go after Mars, which is going to go after these big deals that, you know, you have to invest a lot of capital, have these heavy launches that are going to do. That looks so sick. Going into, that's a pretty big facility. I'm curious how many different launch sites they'll have there. Because like at Launch Complex 1, they have 2.
Right.
Right now they just have this one. I'm curious if they're going to up it.
Well, there's still, so I think the plan is that, so they've got the pad with Electron here, and then I think Wallops is also going to host a facility for Neutron.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the plan. So,
so you think it'll be one for Electron, one for Neutron?
I think they'll have to be, just because of the size constraints with Neutron. There's gonna be a lot more
considerably
infrastructure costs that go into that.
Yeah. So kind of going back to what I was saying, like I was investing initially because I was like, well, not everybody needs to go the SpaceX route. Not everyone needs that much load capacity, right? And so I was like, okay, well, you have some companies that just want to put 4 or 5 satellites into space. Like they're not going to go hire out an entire SpaceX, and they might be too small for what SpaceX is looking for, right? Because at the end of the day, SpaceX is looking for going to Mars, right? And like that, I don't know if they're really considering profit, right? If that makes sense, because they're really just looking for one mission and one mission only. Now, of course, I think in the byproduct of everything, they will eventually create profit, because I think they'll have different launch sites, and you know they'll be able to transport cargo and stuff. If I've heard Elon talk about, but my thought process was you have like a small to medium sized launch company in Rocket Lab, and that was kind of where I saw. And then like I've been blown away by the acquisitions, which we can dive into more of the like investor day presentation, which has completely blown me away. Like how quickly, since they've de-SPAC'd, I guess you could say, how quickly they've kind of gone into the acquisition route. Anyway.
Yeah, I honestly haven't paid too much attention to the acquisition route. I know they've made at least 2, and I think that's where I started delving deeper into the cash position, just because like, hey, I can understand why you would want to get out there and acquire these businesses, but at the same time, like I think at the time they did this, the sentiment in the market wasn't what it is today. So it's one of those like, hey, that's impressive that you guys are, you know, striving to do X, Y, and Z, but we should probably make it through this first. So I know, like, back to the whole competition and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's various small launchers that are starting up. Astra's one that for some odd reason everybody was pumping the war drum on when it first SPAC'd, and I was just like, this doesn't, like, they haven't had a successful launch yet, and we're just going to start pouring money into it. And granted, since then they've had a couple, but they're still struggling. Firefly is another one that just came up and had, I think their most recent launch was a success. Relativity Space is another one that's their whole rocket. I think it's called the Terran 1. It's all going to be 3D printed. So it's nuts, and it's just it's exploding all around them in terms of market. And I don't know. I mean, I think Rocket Labs is in the best position out of all of them to succeed and weather the storm, shall I say? But I don't know.
Yeah, that's kind of where I got to when that kind of whole thing was kind of going down, with everybody kind of SPACing or IPOing, and I had known that Rocket Lab had already gone through a few launches, and I think it was like a few months either before Rocket Lab de-SPACed or what have you. It was like Astra launched their first launch and it was going sideways. Like it was trying its best to like go vertical and it just didn't happen.
Right.
So it's just amazing, like how much hype some of these companies can have. And I don't know if it, like you said, it was the SPAC era or what that truly drove I guess the share price for a lot of these companies. 'Cause even still, like Rocket Lab at one point hit $20, and I was like, oh, okay, it's getting like kind of properly valued, in my opinion, for like five or so, not 5 or so years. I meant like a couple years down the road, but anyway. So you said you had a couple talking points. I don't know if you're just gonna rattle them off at some point, or
I just want
if
to.
you
So
want
yeah,
to
I
dive into
mentioned
them.
kind of the revenue streams that they have, right? So it's not all launch, which I think they get a bad rep for because a lot of people think that. And then I've mentioned the competitors. Back to the whole competition aspect. So a lot of people might think that getting NASA contracts is some huge feat and stuff like that. But if you look around like the industry, everybody gets NASA contracts. It's
Yeah.
kind of something they do to keep everybody in the loop in terms of competition because it's all commercialized now. Well, what do you have to
Mhm.
do then? You have to fund competition because that's ultimately going to drive your costs down, right?
Right.
So I think a lot of that's going on that I don't think people understand the true meaning and value of. So yeah, it's great that Rocket Labs is getting all these really deep NASA contracts, but there's some of them where I'm like, well, I mean, yeah, it's cool and all. The one that I'll give them a lot of credit for and they accomplished spectacularly was the capstone mission that they just did, where in a sense what they did was they sent a small sat around the moon that went in the same orbit as what the Gateway space station is going to go in around the moon when it gets sent up on a starship, I think is the plan ultimately. So that's one where you're like, well, that's pretty cool. And they achieved everything they had to do. So obviously they should see some more contracts coming their way from that. But
Right.
I think another thing too is just the fact that like 38% of launches include a Rocket Labs component of one sort or another. I think that's huge, and it speaks to the fact that they have multiple avenues of revenue, not just launch. Which, like I mentioned earlier, I think if they were just purely a launch company, their odds of survival would be drastically different than what they are now. But yeah, I'm just going through the deck here on the investor day, trying to find these acquisitions you were mentioning. I remember reading about them a little bit, but haven't paid too much attention to it yet.
I mean, a lot of it, the ones that really got me going, and I think there's a really good slide in here, specifically highlighting exactly what you were mentioning, which is like the revenue from, or maybe it's a slide that I made in the past, but it was specifically talking about the commercial revenue versus, or not the commercial revenue. Sorry, I'm thinking pounds here. I'm getting my crap mixed up. Specifically talking about the launch revenue versus the non-launch revenue. Here,
Right.
the space systems revenue, right? And it just kind of goes to show you the total addressable market, right? So this isn't what Rocket Lab is going to be getting, right? But this is more of the TAM, the
It's
total
the TAM, yeah.
for everybody, right? And so I think initially kind of what I was envisioning was it was mostly for launch, right? Like I thought that the launch aspect of it was huge. And then you kind of start to see specifically for Rocket Lab where they're kind of getting to with respect to like very little initially, because this is where I don't know if I invested in 2020 or early 2021, but initially when I was kind of getting involved, it was mostly just the small size to medium size launch. And then they started to acquire more and more of these space systems where it's like
Right.
the op not op, well, I guess it was the company kind of MO, in my opinion, was originally small to medium sized launch. And now it's, at least from this investor deck, has kind of changed to everything that goes into space, they want a Rocket Lab logo on it. And I'm like, that's a pretty badass one.
It's a bold challenge,
Cool.
is what it
And
is.
two, like, yeah, bold. And I think that it's admirable, right? Like, I think
Right.
that that's something that is pretty cool. And then you start to understand like the total addressable market. I'm curious as to how much of this they're going to get. And at least from what I kind of calculated, they're going to get at least 2 to 3% of it in terms of revenue over the next 5 to 6 years or so, growing into 2030. So it's pretty cool to see where they might end up.
Yeah, I mean that. Well, and that's one thing that I even overlooked as well. Like, obviously, I had followed the company prior to it becoming public, or even before the SPAC merger. And I always said, I'm like, dude, if this becomes public, like, I'm investing in it. Like, even if it's just solely a passion play and the odds of survival are next to none, it would be like, some old dude who has model trains. Like, that's his
Right.
hobby, right? Like, I'm gonna put my money in this, and we're gonna see where it goes. And it's just it's incredible once you dive deep into it, just like how much they actually have and how much they're actually going for. I think a lot of, like, why we mentioned it earlier, why people might overlook them too, is they immediately compare it to SpaceX, and you can't compare it to SpaceX. They're two different markets. Rocket Labs has a niche in just space systems and small sat launch. It's not comparable to SpaceX in the slightest, in my opinion, at least. Some might
Right.
disagree with me, but that is what it is.
I think the thing is that they're similar enough that people kind of intertwine the two. And
Yeah.
then I think that if you kind of dive deeper, you realize that they're kind of going after different markets to an extent. But this
Right.
is specifically one of the acquisitions I wanted to talk about, which I thought was pretty
Metamorphic.
badass.
Okay.
Yeah, like the solar cells. So specifically talking about at the moment, single highest efficiency cell in the world, 33%. And I think a lot of what we have like on for residential use or commercial use is like 20 to 25% at best. And that's continuing to get better over time. But the fact that it's able to convert 33% of whatever energy it's able to kind of capture from the sun, and it's also extremely light, right? Like lighter, because obviously if you're putting it on a satellite, you want it to be as light as possible, right? We're talking about load capacities on some of these rockets,
We're
and so
talking we're talking in terms of grams and kilograms and
exactly,
stuff like that.
exactly. And so like to the point where they like is really cool. I was watching a ULA, um, United Launch Alliance. I think it's between Boeing and Lockheed, if I
Yeah.
remember.
Yep. That's right.
And I remember one night I was just lost in one of the factory things that they were, and they basically do like swirl where they heat up the metal and swirl the molecules together rather than doing like not a suture, it's not the right word, solder. Like they don't solder pieces together because that just adds more metal. And
Right.
I'm like, oh my god, like this is cool things that you don't think about. But anyway, just thinking about something like this, like this is now fully owned by Rocket Lab, right? Where it's like, who would have thought that Rocket Lab is in the solar space, right?
I think I may be wrong, but did you have some analogy that you were speaking to this in terms of, like, obviously you working in oil and gas, but with renewables and stuff like that? I want to say I saw you mention it, like, if for those of you that don't know anything about solar energy, like, this is huge or
I
something
mean,
like
33% is like that's huge, right? Like that's the fact that you're getting to 33% is just impressive alone. Because I think most solar arrays get 20 to 25%,
that.
right?
Okay.
So from like a capital not capital, what's the word, capacity standpoint, like if you have 100 megawatts, and maybe this is where I was talking about, you have a 100 megawatt solar field on any given rolling average, let's say over a month, you're going to be lucky to get 20 to 25 megawatts, not the 100 megawatts that's quoted,
Right.
right? And I think that that's what a lot of people don't really think about, but that's more sort of pertaining towards like energy and things of the like. And but
There's a
yeah,
there's a lot of that, like you mentioned with energy and stuff. But I was actually looking at a few slides, and I've since X'd out of them. But it was one, I forget what presentation they had it on, but it was talking about the companies have advertised that their launch capabilities and lift capabilities at X, and only being able to deliver Y, and that Rocket Labs has been the only one that's been able to use every bit of launch capability that they have.
they're
I know
not
they
overstating. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So they compared it to Virgin Orbit's another one. That's a competitor that I forgot about, and they've been doing really well. Regardless of, I completely disagree with the tech that they use for their launches. Like, it's out of the 1960s, but it is what, if it gets the job done and they get margins on it, then do what you got to do.
I mean, I guess my question is like for Virgin Orbit and Blue Origin, like what are their mission statements? Like I'm not even 100% certain I know what they're kind of going after. I mean, because the recreational side for Richard Branson is Virgin Galactic, so that's kind of like out of the realm, right? That's kind of like suborbital, right? So
Right.
it's not really going into super deep space. Whereas the stuff that we're talking about with SpaceX, the stuff we're talking about with Rocket Lab, that's all like legit, like going, interplanetary in most cases, in some of the cases that we're going to be talking about in the future. But I mean, do you really know what's going on with Virgin Orbit and with Blue Origin? I mean, I know Jeff went into space and was able to bring some folks with them, but I mean, I don't really know exactly what their long-term objectives are for that.
I from what I've heard is the hardest, space company to get information out of would be Blue Origin. Like
Okay.
it's like everything is just sworn to complete secrecy. With
Hmm.
with Virgin Orbit, I don't really know anything about, just besides I watched the launch and I'm like, what? We're essentially dropping missiles and using a B-747 as a a fighter jet. Like, what are we doing here? Like I said, if it works, it works, and I commend them for doing that. But
Right.
Blue Origin's one that I can't get an understanding of what exactly they're going after. Obviously, they have that huge rocket they say is in development, but nothing's ever happened with it. They have the landing team that I think is designing one of the landers for the moon, and then they've actually got themselves in trouble, I want to say, with ULA for not delivering their new. I think it's a BE4 engine. Don't quote me on that, but it's something like that. That it's supposed to go in ULA's new Vulcan rocket, and they keep missing delivery dates. I think ULA is suing them now for it, so it's getting interesting.
I just love this stuff, man. Like nothing makes me happier initially. So back in 2013, I'm not sure, I'm trying to get political by saying this, back when Obama kind of like eliminated the space program and he basically retired all launches being done by NASA and stuff of the like, right? And kind of made it privatized. I was very disheartened, right? I was just like,
Right.
this is BS. I was like, you're setting back the world literally back to the 60s, right? Like, and I was like, so we're going to be dragging behind China, Russia, India, these other countries that are continuing to do their space exploration. And it really wasn't until SpaceX that like I kind of started to get kind of that, I guess, antsy like excitement back, right? And I think it was probably closer to 2016, 2017 when they started to have more and more consistent launches. And initially I was pretty negatively viewing like SpaceX because there was a couple explosions back to back and I was just like, this is not going well. And I was kind of like, okay, well, we'll probably never get back to space and all that. And I think it was just like my naivety of like not realizing how commercial it kind of become. So like you had a ULA that was kind of starting up and SpaceX eventually did get their feet underneath them. And but to me, like I still get emotional when I see some of these launches. Like it's pretty, they're pretty badass, man.
I haven't had a chance to talk. Did you watch the Artemis launch at all? See any of that one?
I'm trying to remember.
So that would be NASA's new rocket that they're going to use to go to the moon.
Did that get delayed once?
Oh man, it's been delayed since like 2014. Like it's been nuts. So when you were talking about Obama shut down the government side of NASA, not necessarily shut it down, but more so of like, hey, no more domestic operations, stuff like that.
Right.
So, well, when they did that, the Russians and everybody else that had seats for the U.S. astronauts, they just jacked their prices through the roof. And credit to Obama because he kind of kickstarted this, industrial revolution, so to speak, of, space flight in the U.S.
Right.
So credit to him for that. But that one, the Artemis program is essentially a reboot of Apollo with new mission objectives and stuff like that. The goal is to go to the moon, but stay there, right? So that's where the Gateway space station I was talking about comes into play. It's essentially using it as a docking facility. So you would take your Orion capsule from Lockheed Martin or your Starship, you would dock it to Gateway. then get on your lunar landers. You would then use those to get down to the surface, and then completely reverse it for the other way around.
Mhm.
But
Yeah, that's badass, man.
the Artemis, it's called the SLS rocket, and it's like it's now that it's launched and actually done what it's supposed to do, it's the most powerful rocket ever assembled. So I mean, that was one where I'm like, man, like this is incredible. Like nothing like this has happened since the Apollo program in the late 60s and early 70s.
Yeah, man, it's really exciting stuff. Like I'm trying to honestly remember if I had seen it. I know I watched a recent ULA launch. Now you kind of got me thinking if I ended up watching the Artemis. I'm not spelling that at all. Oh, okay. I guess I did because it looks like
Yeah, you were in there at some point.
Let's see. Is this when it actually launched? Yeah,
It was one that it was.
did.
Yeah, it was on the pad a couple times. Then they had to have a crew come out and actually service the launch tower and the vehicle while like in the middle of propellant ops. It was nuts. I've never seen anything like it because that's incredibly dangerous. I mean,
Right.
I forget the fuel that goes into it. I think it's like liquid oxygen and there's at least another one, but I mean, that's pretty dangerous stuff. So
Yeah, it's I think I remember what it was. I think you and I were talking about it.
Hydrogen burn off igniters.
And
7, 6.
This shit's so
5,
cool.
4-stage engine start. 3.
it gets me upset a little bit just because Lockheed had to terminate their merger with Aerojet, but they assembled the 4 RS-25s you just saw at the bottom.
So, like compared to the Saturn V, 'cause that's a big bad boy, and I've seen the Saturn V in person. Like it's only like 40 miles away from here. I've been there a couple times. Like how big is Artemis comparatively?
That's something I gotta look into more. I've heard like numbers and stuff, but it just doesn't mesmerate enough with me to remember it. I mean, all I know is that it's the the most powerful, but how much powerful could that could be? What just the smallest amount, and then you can claim that title.
Right.
So I don't know. I mean, there's obviously a lot more processing power that goes into it. A lot of that. A lot of it is in the those twin boosters, solid rocket boosters on the side there.
Right.
And those are the same boosters that were on the space shuttle. They've just been reconfigured, and instead of doing, I think it's 3 booster segments that were on the space shuttle, now it's extended to 5. So it's just a little bit bigger. And this isn't even the Artemis, the SLS that launched in November for Artemis 1. It's not the finished product. They actually have another one, and I don't think it's in development. I think they're actually building it now. It's called the Block 1B, I think. And then they're going to have one that's made for cargo missions and stuff like that. So if everything goes right and it doesn't get canceled or anything, I think this is going to be around for the long haul, not just the missions going to.
Just like, I mean, this is Artemis 1, right? I mean, just
Right.
like the Apollo. I mean, they have, what do they get up to? 18, 19? I'm trying to remember how many Apollo missions.
A lot of them were tests. Apollo 11 was the first one that landed on the moon.
Right.
But they also used variations of the Saturn rocket. One of them was for the Skylab space station, right? The first space station that we had. And then some of them were used for like the Soyuz docking missions, where even during the Cold War, we docked with Russians in space, and I think it was in Skylab too. So it wasn't just the Apollo missions that the Saturn V was used for.
Right.
At this time, we will not be proceeding with the go no go poll until we confirm that we are happy with the balloon.
So it looks like they're holding it 12 minutes.
Yeah. Bastards. I'm curious. I wonder how long they're going to delay it for, if they do.
That's the thing with this, is just you never know. It's crazy.
Well, yeah, I mean, it will be cool to see the kind of the night launch though. And I am kind of curious
Okay,
because
as we heard it there from Mission Control, those upper level winds are expected to be out of bounds at the T06 p.m. liftoff time, and we have gone into a hold to wait for that additional weather balloon data.
okay,
So as we wait for that hold, we'll be going into a hold here ourselves on this broadcast too, but we will come back and share updates from Mission
Curious
Control
what,
as we receive them.
but
Stick
anyway,
with us though, and keep your fingers crossed for a drop in those wind levels.
we'll wait for those bad boys to come back.
Yep.
But yeah, like it gets me thinking a good bit. Like I don't really know 100%. Like everything that kind of goes into a lot of this stuff, but like I am kind of curious. I need to do a little bit more research about all the different Artemis launches and what exactly each one is going to try to accomplish. And when, because I guess the is Artemis specifically to go back to the moon, or is it in order to kind of get us on the mission to Mars, or is it a combination of both? Like I don't even know what
It's the way it's perceived from like a public relations standpoint is it's a, hey, the ultimate goal is we have to go to Mars, but to do that we first have to go to the moon. So they're essentially using it as, I don't want to say test missions because that doesn't, it doesn't live up to what it's really meant for, but it is essentially we have to do and accomplish all of these things to make that possible. So it kind of is a test mission. But I think the premise, aside from the Mars aspirations, is, hey, we're going to the moon and we're staying. And that's essentially it. So that's where the Gateway space station comes into play. That's where some of their aspirations of having like a colony comes into play. Essentially like creating like a NASA forward operating base on the moon. And I think part of that too, a lot of it, they from a PR perspective, just say this, and a lot of it, I think behind the scenes is like China's trying to do the same stuff. Like, Russia's a weird one because a lot of their stuff, they don't really publicize as much. China, the same way. But like, I think ultimately it's going to get to a point where everyone has bases. Kind of like what it is now. Everybody has military bases all over the world. And I think it's going to get to the same way there.
Yeah, and I think the thing a little bit that not the thing that I think I'm a little bit curious about is I know Neutron, and Neutron is specifically the Wallop Island, Virginia, which is where we're looking at here on this live stream. It's like the thing that I'm kind of curious about. I know, and eventually Neutron will get to the place where SpaceX is, where it'll be able to land on its own, right? And be able to kind of reuse the entirety of the rocket and things of the like to be able to keep costs down, right? So I know that's coming, but Electron doesn't necessarily have that. So I am kind of curious, as like Neutron, like you kind of mentioned, you might be able to launch, say, in Virginia, and then eventually they might have something in Asia or maybe New Zealand. They still have the New Zealand, so maybe they'll eventually get a landing pad in New Zealand where they might be able to launch from the Virginia, but then be able to re-land in New Zealand if that's the case, or who knows. But yeah, I'm kind of curious. I see the 5-year runway for a lot of these companies. I don't know where I see the 10 to 15 year runway, right? Like I know for a fact I see where eventually right now, at least kind of in the business plan, Rocket Lab is really aiming for 152 launches a year. Maybe it's 156 launches a year. So one launch.
Oh. You there, Matt? Did we lose Matt?
Did I lose you, Hot Cole?
You there?
Yeah, I'm back now, man.
All
Sorry
right.
about that.
No,
I don't know what's going on. So they're really trying to get to the 3 launches, 1 a week, times that by 52 weeks, you get to 156 launches, right? So that's kind of where I see the runway at the moment. And I think right now they're going to try to get the cadence up to about 36 launches a year because now they have the 3 launch pads. It'll take a while. Obviously, Virginia, this is the first launch that they'll be doing from Virginia. So I'm curious when they're going to be able to get a sustainable cadence with respect to that. But I think this year they launched 12, 13. Trying to remember.
I want to say this is either the 12th or the 13th.
Yeah.
With one of them being a failure.
Because I know Jan, Feb, I don't think they launched anything. March, they either did or they delayed. And then from like April forward, they really got into a pretty good cadence of at least one per month. So
yeah, it'll be interesting. I think with Neutron, I think that's where you're going to start opening up your total addressable market even more, right? Because that's a medium launcher, and I want to say their aspirations is having it crew rated, right? So that even opens up your total missions that you can do a lot more than with Electron, right? So you brought this up. This one, this screen or this presentation slide irked me because it's like this doesn't do a good job of talking about what your plans are. Like, are we gonna like? Is this like one of those stair sliding things that gets it out to the ocean? Like, what's going on here? Like,
I was really confused, man. I really was when I saw this. I was like, I'm like, is this the launch pad? What's this thing doing over here? And then here's a landing pad. Like, I'm assuming this is where you're gonna land.
Yeah.
So I was kind of curious, like, a little bit about it. I mean, I know it's a futuristic drawing, and but I'm like really kind of curious as to, what exactly is going on this particular picture. What does they? No, they don't really have anything. This one.
Yeah, but I think I mentioned a few months back that I could see them using the Neutron for more of a space station resupply. Because right now I know Northrop Grumman and another company typically do the resupply missions aside from SpaceX. So I'm kind of curious if they'll get any slice of that pie. And then with how much Boeing is just destroying themselves with the Starliner program, it makes you wonder if Rocket Labs can eventually, get themselves into that picture and become a third crew launcher for those kinds of missions as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's this guy came from, I think, from the solar company. He seems pretty badass. Yeah, I think
I was in there. They have a slide where they talk about it has their management tree and then also the various companies that make up their management. And you've got your NASA, and then I think Lockheed Martin was on there, General Dynamics, and some others. So I mean, it's a lot of people with a lot of experience. And then obviously Peter Beck is still in the picture, so he's the guy that founded it and stuff like that. And he came from I forget where he worked beforehand, but he did a lot of like hands-on kind of stuff, like what's going on. So
yeah, it's definitely an interesting company. I'm like really curious as to how it's gonna go, and I did want to kind of look at that one of the last slides. I did show it up, so it's like the cash position, right? So from the pipe, they got 777 million. And you kind of alluded to, like, after Q3, they only have like 300 some million left of this cash and cash equivalents. So it's like, how quickly are they going to burn through it? Like, I know they did some strategic acquisitions, and that's part of the reason why they burned through some cash. But it's like, I think I'm curious, do they have a slide for cash flow in here? Or do I need to go for the Q3?
I think it's in the... Yeah, so if you go, it's not in the Q3 slide deck either. You have to go to the website and then go to I think it's the quarterly filings. So go to financials and then SEC filings.
Oh, SEC.
Yeah, I think it's in there. Maybe I was wrong. Financials and then quarterly results. So you had it right the first time. My bad.
All fake.
And then the quarterly filing, I think it's in there.
Is this that gives a cash flow statement?
Yeah, stuff like that.
So I'm kind of curious how quick their burn rate is. So cost of revenue, consolidated. What is this? Where it's cash flows. Here you go. So cash flow. So net loss. Okay, that makes sense. But what are they actually losing? 9 months. So they lost 90 million in the first 9 months in terms of cash flow, and then total cash 272 in 2022. It's a shit ton.
Yeah.
I don't know how much of that is like what's 180. I guess this is that 180 million that they're referring to in here.
Yeah, for the space system business, which they get the most revenue from, right? So they must see that by acquiring the businesses at the prices they got them for, that they're going to see massive returns. So we'll see just how quickly they can make that happen.
So yeah, now I guess I'm kind of curious now is like how profitable are those other organizations, and so it's like, and I know there's good material on the margins and stuff like that in these investor presentations, so they are transparent about that. But I guess I'm kind of curious is we've gone from $50 million burn rate last year in 2021 to an 87. Granted, we have way many more launches this year than we did last year, right? So that's part of it. And then I think coupling that with these acquisitions, obviously you're going to have more overhead with all these different companies that you're now running. I guess where I'm kind of trying to look for in 2023 is what their burn rate is. And I'm trying to remember if they gave an idea. I think they did in their guidance for fourth quarter revenue 51 to 54. I guess they didn't. Maybe they did in the presentation. Let's see what their full year burn rate. Sorry if I'm giving people whiplash from jumping through these slides.
Yeah, I wish they organized their, investment literature a little better than what they did. It's kind of all over the place.
Right. Cash consumed 15 to 23 million. Working capital, yada yada yada. Investing activities 176. Purchase of stuff. Financial outlook, I guess. They don't give a next year outlook, do they?
No.
Okay. So OPEX expense 39 to 41 million. So I anticipate they're about $160 million a year burn rate. So probably like 120 to $160 million a year burn rate at the current moment. So I'm curious at what point they get to the point where they are able to. I mean, the revenues are growing quickly, right? I mean, last year.
Yeah, I want to say in one of the slides, it talks about like revenue year over year is over 1,000% increase.
Yeah.
But once you've gotten yourselves down to that, X amount of millions in cash, it all comes back to, margins and what your burn rate is and stuff like that.
Exactly.
So, they mentioned before they went the SPAC route, Peter Beck was like, listen, like we're doing this because we have to fund Neutron. Like this is the way of the future and this is what we got to do. So I think a lot of people probably see that as problematic. I myself am a little pessimistic about that, right? Even though this is, strictly a passion play for me, obviously I want it to succeed.
Right.
But I mean, that's a pretty significant burn rate. And coupled with that, you just made 176 million in acquisitions.
Yeah, let me get rid of this bot that's in here.
But it is crazy just looking at how much of a difference there is in terms of revenue between space systems and actual launch components. It's nuts.
It is pretty crazy, man. Sorry, I was hiding that bot. It has grown drastically, right? Because I'm trying to remember how many launches they had last year comparatively. Oh, this is this one quarter.
Yeah,
Got
that's just Q3.
Okay. Remember seeing it somewhere. No, that's not year on year. I guess they have in this presentation or slide pack, not slide pack, the cash flow statement. They have the first 9 months. Is this the wrong one? Did I get too far? Here we go. Condensed cash flow. 9 months. Here we go. This is the income statement. So revenue's up, yeah, pretty significantly. Last quarter, 2021, it was about 5.2. Now it's 63. So that's that 1,000% you were talking about.
Yeah.
And then from 35 million for the first 9 months to 160 million. So that's about a 400% increase there. But you are starting to see some potential gross profit, which is good.
Right, and I think that's where it's going to come into play against the competitors, right? So they obviously have an edge on their competitors, not only in launch capability and launch cadence, but also I'd say they probably have, aside from relativity space, I need to do some more digging into theirs, but I would say compared to their competitors, I think they have a healthier balance sheet. Don't quote me on that, but I think that's where they're at in terms of their competition.
Yeah, because I guess...
And then I know they're expecting a little bit of a decrease in revenue just because their launches have pushed into Q1 next year. So that was interesting. I don't really know what the meaning behind that is, but they did touch on it a couple different times in that presentation.
In the Q3 presentation, you mean?
Yeah.
And the investor day?
I think it was the Q3.
Yeah. I'm just kind of curious. Like, I did some brief math. I'd maybe pull up my Twitter post that I did, or maybe it's something I can prepare for next month. But it was basically like kind of using the numbers that you see here for launch and stuff like that, about how much it was. Like, I know in Q3 we had 3 launches. So I was assuming you get like $6.5 to $7 million a launch. It's kind of like about what kind of revenue you were getting, and then just trying to understand how the revenue would grow over time. And from what it looks like if they're able to kind of get to where they're going, it looks like right now they should be able to get to, in about 5 years' time, about $2 billion in revenue run rate with the 3 launch pads. And that's before you kind of have like a Neutron kind of coming in. That's specifically looking at Electron. But that's the thing that I don't understand and have that kind of knowledge behind is like when they come out with Neutron, how much additional launches are they going to do with Electron, right? Like, are they still going to do 3 launches per week with Electron? Is that kind of still the goal? And then get the launches up with Neutron once Neutron's able to kind of come out. It's all kind of curious to me. Oh, we got Alexa talking now. Alexa, stop.
I think as far as the launch cadence goes, when you have both of those capabilities being Neutron and Electron, I think a lot of it with Electron has to deal with the margins in terms of whether or not they're able to crack that recovery, aspect of operations. So now they're still trying to get the helicopter to do its things, and I don't necessarily like that. I mean, if they can get it to work, good for them. I would just prefer we wait for the recovery operations with Neutron, and then with Electron, just try and squeeze every dime possible out of the manufacturing costs and get it as low as possible. But I mean, they seem pretty confident that they can make it happen. So good on them for at least trying, and hopefully they can crack it.
Yeah. So for the 5-6 of you that are in here watching, no, the rocket has not taken off yet. So there's some high winds that they're waiting for one of the weather balloons to kind of signal that it's within the appropriate weather window for them to launch. So they're holding it about 12 minutes. They've done some of the go. They haven't done their full go, no go, but I think they've done some of the initial go, no go sort of things. And once they get within the appropriate weather window, they'll do the go, no goes. So right now they're holding it at T minus 12 minutes until they get within the appropriate window. But I think once it gets to 8 p.m. Eastern time, I think they're going to call it, at least from what they said, that the window was likely to be from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. So we'll see how it ends up looking.
Right. I know somebody was asking what the payload max capacity is compared to SpaceX. I mean, it's not comparable, right? So obviously SpaceX, their capacity is going to be thousands of times more with more potential than Rocket Labs. It's not comparable. The only operations that happen that are in complete competition to Electron and Rocket Labs are when SpaceX does I think it's called rideshare. And rideshare is essentially when it's like, hey, we have 10 customers for, just due to cost benefit analysis, we're going to put them all on the same ride. So that's where SpaceX can come in and swap up a bunch of different customers at once. The only downside with that, and why a lot of customers prefer a smaller company like Rocket Labs, comes to orbit insertion. So, I mean, say, for example, there's a radio company out there, obviously, Sirius XM and stuff like that, but there's companies that launch satellites. They want their satellites to get into exactly the spot that they need them to be fully efficient, right? So if you put your payload on a ride share in comparison to a dedicated ride that Electron can provide, you're not necessarily going to get that kind of orbital insertion, because what they're going to tell you is, hey, so we've got 10 customers and we're going to put you in XYZ orbits. It's not necessarily going to be what you want, but we're going to be able to deliver you a faster launch cadence than a competitor. So some companies might view that and be like, yeah, we got to get it up now. We'll deal with everything else afterwards. Or you have a Rocket Labs where it might take more time, but they might get your payload to the exact orbit it needs to be fully efficient. And another thing that you have to take into account is orbital insertion can mean a lot in terms of how long that satellite can be operational, right? So a lot of companies look at that as well. So obviously SpaceX is going to have higher launch capacity in terms of, all of the different types of orbits. It just comes down to what kind of customer and what kind of size of satellite they need to put into space. In some cases, they are attracting the same customers, but in most, it's a totally different ballgame.
And for this, Virginia is for Launch Lover's mission from LC2. We are in a hold in the launch countdown due to strong winds in the upper atmosphere above Electron's launch site. Our launch director has called for a hold in operations to wait for those winds to come down so we can fly within our safety bound.
Okay. So they're still on hold. But I did see somebody ask a quick question in the chat. So this is Rocket Monthly number 1. Does that mean another rocket is launching next month? We hope. I mean, I think there's 3 different launch pads now. So this is the first launch from the Virginia launch pad, or it would be if we do eventually have a launch here. There's 2 launch pads within New Zealand, which is actually pretty cool, part of the company. Majority of the operations and like the launch control and stuff like that happens in the United States from like Long Beach and stuff like that. So like the operations rooms, there's like one in, I don't know if they do a lot of testing in New Mexico. They have like an operation room in Denver or Colorado. Then they have like the actual headquarters in Long Beach. They have 2 launch pads in New Zealand itself, which is pretty cool. And they've already launched, Cole, correct me if I'm wrong, I think they've launched Electron over 30 times at this point.
I think so. It's like 30. It's either they've launched over 30 times or had 30 successful flights and they've deployed 150 satellites.
Yeah, so I mean, that's part of the reason then the allure of looking at Rocket Lab comparatively to some of these other companies is like they at least have a pretty good track record. I think it's either the second most launched rocket. I'm probably getting that wrong, but I think it's the second most launched rocket after something in SpaceX. I forget exactly what it is. But that's the allure is. But I don't think that we're going to do one. Maybe we'll do. Actually, that's a good point. I don't know how often we're going to do it. I had a conversation with Chris Patel, who's somebody that's also rather interested in the company. He couldn't make it today. I would like to have him on and introduce Cole and him because I know it's either you, Cole, or Bailey that's a big fan, or probably both of you.
I think it's both of us. I like the fact that he looks from in a lot of terms of investments, he's willing to look at it from both sides of the viewpoint, right?
Yeah,
so he's
yeah.
not just locked into, oh, this is the greatest thing since blah blah blah. No, he's like,
right.
It's perfect. It's awesome that he does that. So
I'm very much a glass half full, so much so that I'll somehow convince people that it's 3/4 full. And Chris does a good job without completely crapping on everyone's day. He does a good job of bringing in an alternative perspective, and Bailey does a good job too. Bailey's one of the folks that I lean on pretty heavily. She brings me back down to earth, which is always nice because I'm an eternal optimist. So this will be the first launch from Virginia, which is a pivotal moment, I think, in the company's history, because this is also going to be where they have their medium-sized launch rocket being built is in Virginia. But how often we do Rocket Lab monthly, I think is really just based off of availability and if there's any updates, right? So it doesn't have as many updates as something like a Palantir, right? I know you guys probably normally see me coming online on Palantir Weekly, where we have a little bit more news up to date. But Rocket Lab is, I'd say, kind of a younger company. They're still trying to get into their own, but maybe things quicken pace, right? And maybe we end up having, a quick chat every time there is a monthly launch. That would be pretty cool. But I think the hope is that eventually they get to weekly launches. So we'll see.
I think a lot of it too is just how they're gonna. We may have referenced this a little bit, but just how they're gonna utilize the different pads, right? So the main reason why the New Zealand launch operation facility is so crucial is because who else is launching from New Zealand, right? And because of that, they can essentially, and Peter Beck and has mentioned this a multitude of times, because we're operating where we are, we can essentially do it whenever we want. So there's that. And then another thing is back to, getting the right things in the right spots, so to speak, in terms of orbits. You kind of want to have, different facilities for the sole purpose of, you might have some customers that because of the orbit insertion they need, you can't launch from where you currently have operations launching from. So because of having those different launch capabilities, you might even, get even more TAM out of it just because of that. There's a lot that goes into launches other than just the specs of the vehicle itself. And I know I mentioned in the chat the payload to low Earth orbit being 300 kgs or 661 pounds. I know there was a question in the chat that we mentioned about, but I wanted to get into specifics on that. So, like I said, considerably smaller than Falcon 9. But the purpose of Electron isn't to be Falcon 9. Like I mentioned, totally different ballparks. And currently, Rocket Lab is in a very, very small niche market.
Yeah, it's a very made to order. Here you have up in this right hand corner, book my launch, right? That's how easy it is. Yeah. It's like anybody who wants to do something, you can launch 1 satellite, 2 satellites. Here's some of the statistics now. Now you can see they've updated to 3 dedicated launch pads. It's pretty badass. But 32 launches to date, as Cole mentioned, over 150 satellites. They do hope to plan to have it be a reusable vehicle in the long term. Pretty cool. I'm kind of curious. I'm wanting to kind of look in between the two because I was just looking at some of the Neutron specifics. It's 18 meters, 59 feet, about 4 feet in diameter. But then when you kind of look at the Neutron specifics. I just had it open.
It's crazy. I remember, I think it was Peter Beck that took a picture where I think it's the video where he sat down and ate a hat, because that was a running joke for a while. If Electron and them ever got into recovery operations, he was going to eat a hat because he was so against it. And then when it zoomed out, it was the fairing of the Neutron rocket. And I'm like, holy crap! Like, this thing is huge in comparison to Electron.
It's pretty big, man. It's like, so keep in mind, Electron's 60 foot. This is 140 feet, and so it's almost 4 times the length. The diameter is a little bit more than 4 times the size, right? So Electron's 4 feet wide. This is 16 feet wide. Pretty cool. This uses methane. What is this? Uses
LOX
kerosene.
Yep. So
Yeah.
liquid oxygen, that's what LOX is. For those who don't know.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And so the good pivotal points of this is I thought that was funny. Yeah, the actual molds themselves, which is pretty cool. Like, it was really cool to be able to see all the different molds that they're kind of creating to be able to get everything ready. They're almost ready to create the first Neutron rocket, it looks like.
That's
This is
cool,
the mold, and
I forget when they said they plan on having the development done. Wasn't it 2024?
They have it in here somewhere.
I want to say, for some reason in my mind, I kept thinking they were talking about 2024, but then with all the steps they keep sending out, it's like, man, like, it's almost like they're going to be done before the 2024 mark, but I guess we'll see.
So this is all by the end of 23. So pre-burner testing, stage 1 and stage 2 test sites, stage 1, stage 2 tanks, structures built, engine testing, avionics and hardware and software, the test site. I mean, it's a pretty big deal, right? Because it's not like they're using, I forget what's the initial engine that they use on the Electron. I forget what that's called.
I think it's the Rutherford.
That's right. So then they're switching the engine too, right? So they're switching
like
to Archimedes.
Or something.
Yeah. And this is really cool too, because you hear Elon talk about this a little bit when you listen to some of the SpaceX conversations. Is like, do you run it like just the different ways that you can run engines and stuff like that, and how it provides different boosts, and it's just really cool. It's something that I never really knew about until I started exploring more and more into rockets. The different, because you can see, how do I say it? The engine can either burn really cleanly, or it can burn with excess fuel, and then that's when you see almost like a second tail in the I don't know what the right term of it is, but I guess the boost, when you have the boost thruster where you have the initial flame kind of coming down, there's sometimes a secondary tail that can kind of be, and that's depends on how much they recycle and all that crap within the engine. Put in perspective, I'm trying to remember how big the Rutherford engine was in terms of thrust.
I'm not sure. Forget.
Thrust. Does it have it on here? Kick stage.
It says peak thrust 224 kN. I'm not sure what kN means, in all honesty.
224 kN, yeah. So 56,000 pound-feet versus, so almost 3 times the power.
Okay, yeah.
And then the single, that's vacuum thrust. Okay. So it's different. I don't know the difference really.
So it says sea level thrust, so I wonder if that's comparable to Electron's liftoff thrust.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking. Because vacuum, I anticipate that probably removes gravity aspect of things, right? Because that has the 9.8 meters per second gravity that's kind of pulling you down. So I'm sure the second engine is a lot smaller, but because it's in the vacuum, and that's the only time you're ever going to use it.
Yeah,
That's
it'll be
pretty-
interesting to see what I don't know if they've talked any about the single stage engine that they have for the second stage or not. I know, like for the Electron, it's just a single vacuum Rutherford engine, and then after that second stage, they have a kick stage, which is meant to get like Electron's payloads into that precise orbit insertion. So I'm kind of curious how they go about it with the engineering in terms of Neutron, if they kind of do kind of the same thing that they did with Electron, or if it's going to be different.
Got 13,000 people waiting for this damn thing to launch.
I love the names of the missions are what crack me up the most. Virginia's for launch lovers. Like,
I know, man. I want to get some of the shirts. If I'm curious if you have to be like an employee to get some of the shirts, because when I was looking at Wish a lot more, which I don't too much anymore these days, they had some of the shirts, and I don't know if it was like people just, I don't know. Like, I'm curious now if I go into Wish if they have any of these shirts and stuff. Do I even have the Wish app on my phone anymore?
As you're gonna say, this is where Bailey chimes in and say, if you order a shirt, you'll get it in Christmas 2024.
2024, man.
Man.
Let's see. I'm curious what kind of, because some of the names are pretty dope. Man, this thing's taking forever to download. Help me, I'm poor. Let's see. Do we have any? Oh, we got this. We got another.
We'll
Whoops.
go into their upcoming missions. So
Okay, that's hidden. Good.
I'm just the next one I'm looking forward to is their privately funded mission to Venus that they've gone on about a few times. That's the big one for me.
Because that's the first one to Venus, right? I mean, at least from what I know of, first actual flyby.
I'm not too sure actually. I feel like with all that's been done in the history of spaceflight that someone at one time or another sent a probe or a flyby to Venus, but I could be incredibly wrong. That would be even better if it's the first one, for them to accomplish that. But I thought it was kind of funny when Peter Beck was talking about it, and he's like, everybody talks about Mars. He's like, where's the love for Venus? He's like, we're just doing this to be different. I just thought it was so funny how he went about discussing that.
Because I'm trying to remember, what are they trying to do? They're trying to capture samples from the atmosphere. I forget what exactly the mission was. See if I can pull it up.
I can read through the summary. So it's supporting the search for life off of Earth. So essentially what we do in Mars, and then essentially what they say is that research suggests that Venus was once a habitable planet just like Earth, and that in 2019 there was a study from NASA that said Venus could have had like shallow oceans on its surface.
Damn.
For like 2 to 3 billion years. So
2 to 3 billion.
Yeah,
that's not a small amount of time. Okay. Yeah, let's see
well,
what
I
they
mean,
got.
In the grand scheme of things, it might be, but yeah, it's interesting that they're going to do that.
Oh wow, they've expanded this a lot more since the last time I looked at it.
Oh, no kidding.
For the upcoming launches. Blue Ghosts. What? Have you heard about this?
Blue Ghost, no.
Powering a landing on the moon as early as 24. Oh, okay. Okay, sorry. I think now that they have the other, I was originally when they had the upcoming missions, it was launch only, and now that the fact that they have a multitude of things like satellites and solar and stuff, that it was getting me like, I was like, we're really launching something to the moon real quick?
But this actually speaks to the competition in play here. So if you keep that picture right where it's at in the description, it talks about how it's providing the solar panels to Blue Ghost, a lunar lander developed by Firefly Aerospace. So that's another small sat launcher.
Right.
that's out in the market right now, and they just had a successful launch. I think they've had 2 with 1 failure. So it speaks more to just this is a very it's a market that's broadening and expanding, month by month. It's incredible. But the fact that they're all kind of working together too is kind of unique.
And I don't know how many missions Capstone is going to be.
I think that was just a one-time thing. They were just getting the data for the orbits for Gateway and stuff like that. I think that was kind of the sole purpose.
That was delayed a few times too.
Well, it almost failed. Not from the Rocket Lab's perspective, but once it changed hands over to NASA, I think they lost comms with it for a few days. It was bad because it wouldn't have necessarily delayed the launch of Artemis 1, but it could have delayed, obviously Gateway going into space, and then the Artemis 2 and 3 and 4 missions that have like crews on them.
This goes back to the Venus mission. Yeah, what you were talking about. Supported temperature between 68 and 122 degrees Fahrenheit. 700 million years ago, resurfacing event, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, turning Venus into a dangerous, inhospitable planet. Rocket Lab is sending the first private mission to Venus in search of supporting evidence of organic compounds in the cloud layer, traces of life. The goal, using an Electron launch vehicle and a Photon spacecraft, send the probe around 30 miles altitude where Venus atmospheric conditions are closer to those found on Earth. Oh, there has been 30 missions to Venus undertaken. Rocket Lab will be the first private exploration.
Yeah.
Like you
Which
said.
is still, I mean, that's an incredible milestone in and of itself, just being a private, well, now I guess you could say a public company, but at the same time, private funding that mission. It'll be very interesting to see how that works out.
Seen the Hawkeye.
I'm curious what the timetable would be on getting to Venus. Because, I mean, that's a month, that's like months long.
Rocket Lab awarded $143 million subcontract by Global Star, basically, for 17 spacecraft buses. New low Earth orbit satellites.
And so they're just entrenching themselves into all kinds of different business opportunities from the looks of things, which is...
I just want to know how bolt-on they are, right? Like, because Peter was very heavily focused, Peter Beck being the CEO, very heavily focused on the launch aspect of things. And now it just seems like, I don't know, the broader, I don't know if it was the board of directors or what. And I'm like, I get that Peter's the CEO, but it's like, at what point do you need somebody that might be more focused on, not to say Peter's done a bad job, but it's just like, does he know about satellites? I mean, maybe he does. Maybe I'm just being naive and I don't know, but this is interesting. How quickly they've kind of expanded over the course of 2022, and very silently, if I might add. There wasn't like a lot of press coverage about it, and that's part of the reason why I'm like, we need to start getting the news out there about this place. The sole provider of solar panels, Natchez Psyche mission. Unique metal asteroid orbiting the sun between Mars and Jupiter. 2.4 billion kilometer solar power journey supported by Solera solar panels, the largest ever installed to a spacecraft at NASA's JPL. When the arrays are fully deployed on Psyche's interplanetary expedition, it'll be about the size of a single tennis court. Huh.
That's nuts. I know that they had solar panels on the Orion capsule that launched on Artemis 1 in November. So that was kind of cool to see as well. So, and I mean, that's a launch component that, like I said, that's with Lockheed Martin, that's Boeing, that's Aerojet Rocketdyne. Like these aren't small fish. Like these are the big contractors as far as NASA. So, but it also speaks to the fact that NASA is going to try and keep as many of these guys in business as possible to drive down costs.
I love this.
It's a test and still testing.
That's funny. I had no idea that those were the first. Do they have photos of it? Oh, that's so cool. That's what I'm saying, man. Like, I don't think that this company gets enough credit. They're years ahead of some of these folks.
And I like the fact too, where I think if you go in, and you may have shown this, they talk about the customers' mission outcomes. So it's not somebody that tries to not talk about their failures or try and get away from them. Like, they'll just straight up be like, hey, like, this was a setback.
Let's check in on.
But I do think, revolving back to your point about Peter Beck, I'm pretty sure he's got years of experience in terms of working with like satellite components and stuff like that. I think where things started going off of his vision was in terms of the acquisitions, but I think that's a means of survival, right? Like I kind of mentioned, if they just stick with launching, I don't think anything ever comes of that.
Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised when I was kind of looking through the investor presentation.
Yeah.
Because of all the expansion, and I mean, I knew that they were trying to do some like satellite work and stuff like that earlier in the year, but to see how expansive it's gotten was a huge surprise, and a pleasant surprise at that. Jesus, looks like they're.
It looks like a SAM battery.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. I was like,
this is getting a little Star Wars-y.
Yeah, exactly.
Peter. Oh man, that's nuts. I was in Norfolk a few months back. That's not too far from where Wallops is. I should have drove up there and tried to get as close as possible to the facility.
If now that so I don't live. I was gonna say I don't live too far, but it's probably like a 4 or 5 hour drive for me to go to not South Padre. Where the hell they launched SpaceX? Oh, what's it called? I forget what it's called, but it's like a 4 or 5 hour drive for me from Houston.
Boca Chica?
Yeah. And I've been thinking about that, and then I will probably at some point try to see one in Virginia as well if I have the opportunity, because it'd be worth it.
Right. That's what I mean. Yeah, too. With how it's set up down there in Boca Chica, it seems like literally everyone can just go about their days, and then when they are about to do something crazy, they obviously alert people and stuff like that. But I mean, you can get pretty close to what they got going on down there.
All right. Hot Kev, no launch yet. We're holding at 12 minutes.
Launch Complex 1 has become the gateway to space for small satellites.
Waking up from his Sunday snooze, he says.
A little Sunday snoozle.
Little Sunday slumber.
Hot Kev hit the mimosas a little too hard at brunch.
You gotta respect that.
I don't blame him.
No excuses. Play like a champion.
Yeah. Drive fast, take chances. That's what my one coworker says. I'm all about it. Man.
Oh, man.
Well, at the same time, Cole, I don't want to hold you up. I feel bad that I was really hoping in gambling that there wouldn't be any weather problems, but it looks like there are.
It never goes as planned with this stuff. It's unfortunate.
Sometimes it does, but I am going to be watching. So I don't know. I mean, you tell me. I don't mind hanging out for another 10, 15 minutes, but at the same time, I know it's Sunday and you probably have to work hard tomorrow because you're a hardworking man. So don't feel obligated to stay on. I know I'm going to be sitting around watching it, but at the same time, don't want you to have to help entertain, if that makes sense.
I can stick around here for another 10 to 15. We haven't talked much about just overall portfolio moves. What you got going on?
This week, I purchased a little bit more Google. I purchased a little bit more SPY. Other than that, I think it's mostly just been me moving around some funds to be able to purchase the rental property at the end of the month. And I'm not moving a lot of money I'm right now out of there just because I don't want them to freak out.
Right.
Because they're doing all their due diligence and looking at all my transactions and stuff of the like. And so I'm sure next week I'll probably have to give them a bunch of transactions and stuff too. And so I'm sure they're just like keeping a close eye on it. So after that, I'll probably help just pre-fund the mortgage account for a couple months, because we're not going to have a lot of rentals in the winter time for a beach rental. So hopefully we'll be able to kind of just be even Steven. So I think our first mortgage payment will be the 1st of February. So it'll be nice. We'll see how well it does. But that's going to be something where we've all kind of agreed that whatever money we make from that rental, we're going to keep reinvesting back in, not to that property, but just back into other
Acquiring
rentals.
more, particularly.
Exactly.
No, that's awesome. Congratulations, by the way. I don't think we've really talked about that at all. That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I've been kind of quiet because we haven't closed yet. You know what I mean?
Right.
But I mean, surprisingly, you know, they took my credit, and I don't know why anybody wants to give me money, but yeah, a little bit higher of a mortgage rate that I would want, because, and it's not solidified yet, but so I don't want to give a number, but it's definitely higher than I would want. Part of it's because it's a second home. It's not anybody's primary home.
Right.
And then also because it's kind of like an investment property, right? So, and we're putting less than 20% down. So they're also taking a little bit of a hit on us for that. So, but that's nice. Like, I guess if anybody's ever looking initially, and maybe for you, Cole, as well, initially I thought for like investment properties, you'd always have to put 20 to 25% down. Well, one of the good things about this current administration is that they've kind of made Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac relax a little bit. I think it was more Fannie Mae, from what I was told, that you don't have to necessarily put 20% down on a secondary property, right? Or a secondary home, if that makes sense. So anybody that is looking at potentially buying into rental real estate and only wants to put 10% down, that's what we're putting down. And there's been nobody that's like laughing at us, right? There's nobody like, are you sure you don't want to do 20? Like, it's like, okay, like nobody's really scoffing at us. So if you only have 10%, right, not that 20%, you know, that's an avenue now, and you don't necessarily have to break the bank, but you will be paying at least 0.5% more because it's a secondary home, which I thought was kind of BS. But
I mean, I could
sense.
be like, I'd be okay with like a 0.2, 0.25-ish, but a 0.5% because of something like that. Yeah, that's a little absurd, but oh well.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I don't think it'll affect you all that much. So
it'll be fine, man. I mean, I think the hope is like whatever we do get, we'll probably end up shopping around. And when you, the fact is like the big thing is closing on the house. And so that's where a lot of the closing fees are. And if we want to refinance, it'll cost a couple grand, you know what I mean? And so we're fine paying out of pocket a couple grand if it shaves off. I mean, if we're able to shave off of a percentage or something like that, and we're talking probably close to $500 a month, right? So it's worth it to potentially shop around once we kind of get the deal closed. And if mortgage rates get better next year, as the second half of next year, if they start to relax a little bit on the federal funds rate, then we kind of get into the fives, mid fives, low fives. That's kind of our goal. And like the medium term is to kind of get it to the fives, because if we get into the mid to low fives, we'll probably be saving like $1,100 a month or something like that from where we're at today. So that's kind of the hope. But I'm excited. I mean, the only thing I've ever really done for rental real estate is my dad's first house, which I managed kind of partly with my mom, and that's kind of her money, right? So we have a handyman that we pay to do a lot of the heavy lifting for us. But that's really my only experience, is like creating the leases and stuff for that. But this will be different because it'll be through VRBO or Airbnb. So it'll be cool to see.
Yeah, for sure.
What about you? What have you been buying other than, I know you mentioned a little bit of up front, but I'm curious what.
Yeah, so I got I'm still building up Palantir every now and then. I'm probably actually going to buy some more tomorrow morning if it opens in the red or just slightly in the green. And then I got back into Kroger, and Broadcom is my newest one. So ticker
I'm curious,
symbol.
what's Kroger down to?
Kroger's at like 44.30 right now, so it's not the best entry, but I'm gonna be in that for a long time. So
Kroger.
yeah,
Well, they keep acquiring stuff, at least from what I remember.
yeah, they have one acquisition that I think is getting some it's going through like some minor temporary setbacks from what I've seen. It's one that Kevin and I were talking about in the WhatsApp group.
Hot Kev. Yeah, I think what was it? No, it wasn't that. When was it, man? I forget. I wrote a long call on Kroger at one point, and it was like $100 bet, and I forget what it was, but I think it had a great earnings report or something like that, and I think it jumped, and I made like $750. It was like the coolest thing I ever did, because I don't really do long calls much, right? If I do anything, it's mostly Albertsons. Thanks, Hot Kev.
That's the one.
Hot Kev, keeping us honest, man.
Yeah, so officially, like I'm sorry to cut you off. Go ahead.
No, I mean that's it. I broke boy, bought $100 call, and I turned it into $750 with Kroger, and never looked back at it ever since.
I think there's something going on with this Albertsons deal of where either Kroger or Albertsons trying to pay out like some extraordinary dividend post merger or maybe even pre merger, and there's some people that are like, whoa, like we don't think that's the best use of cash or something. I don't know. So I don't think that one's going to go through at any point in time in the close future. But pretty much what I did was all of the Exxon I sold, I just used that to get back into Kroger, more tech, and then Broadcom. And I'm still sitting on a considerable amount of cash that I'll probably use to kickstart the Roth January 1st.
Hell yes.
Yep.
Someone's got to do it. Well, I will say one stock that has completely blown me away, and I continue to see. So my mom moved from outside of the Philadelphia area, which is where I grew up, and she moved kind of more rural central Pennsylvania just to kind of get away from the hustle and bustle of things. What I will say is like these Dollar Generals are popping up absolutely everywhere.
Yeah,
it's pretty interesting. Yeah, like, and I'm sure maybe you live out kind of
the aim of the game today for our first launch from LC2. Earlier in the year, our team in Albuquerque recently delivered solar panels for NASA's Gateway Power and Propulsion Element. We sat down with some of the team to hear their thoughts.
But anyway, yeah, Dollar General, crazy. They just
This
keep
project
building
is very
more and
exciting
more
because we are taking.
Yeah, I'm curious where
all light modular,
like what their distribution centers are like, just from having worked in one in the past. I know, like,
lots of power to support.
Obviously, you can keep popping off, stores every which direction you want, but if you don't have the logistics hubs to make it optimal, it can be a real struggle. I remember hearing about some struggles a few years back, kind of when I was applying for certain jobs. Just not being able to move freight efficiently as they want, kind of essentially what the Tyson guy got into with Palantir, right? Where he was just like, listen, we weren't optimizing trucks to our best capabilities, stuff like that. And people don't think about it, but I mean, freight's not cheap. And if you're paying for a full truck and only filling up a third of it or half of it, like all the remaining bit, you're still getting billed for, so it's just.
Yeah, well, one of the things that I recognize is like, going back to the logistics piece, is like what I noticed is like all the Dollar Generals are on this one really long regional road. So it's like, it's not a highway, it's not an interstate, it's nothing like that. It's just like this, it's an offshoot of an interstate. So like if anybody ever needs to get to the interstate, this is the road they're going to take. So it's smart from Dollar General's perspective because, hey, use the interstate to go large, long transfers of stuff. But then once you get off the interstate, they literally have like 3 or 4 Dollar Generals within like a 20 to 30 minute ride up this one road. So it's like one kind of out as soon as you get off the interstate, another one like 10 minutes after you get off, another one it's a little bit further off than that. And so it's like, okay, instead of doing all these twists and turns, it's literally just like stay on this interstate, fill up these 4 stores, get back on the highway. And so it's kind of like cookie cutting almost, like your logistics, which I think was pretty genius. And I'm curious if they did that by design or if it's just like really coincidental. Anyway.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I know a few years ago one opened up just down the road from me because I'm right in the middle of like borderline living in the city, but also living in a rural setting. So, I mean, there's 2 or 3 of those that I pass on the way to work, and then I work in the capital, so like there's a lot of Kroger's, like Kroger's, Payless's, Ruler Foods. It's all owned by Kroger, so I mean, and they're just always packed. It's like going to a Starbucks at 6 a.m. and you're still in the main avenue, not even turned into the store yet. Like it's nuts. So
what's Payless? I never heard of that.
Payless is just a subsidiary of Kroger.
Okay.
Yeah, and a lot of it too, like Ruler Foods is another one. So like, and obviously just instead of having the Kroger name, they have that, but they still sell the Kroger generic products and stuff like that. So, yeah.
We have HEB, Kroger. We have Aldi. I don't think we have any Lidls, but we do have Aldi. What else do we have? Walmart, Target.
You said you had Aldi's?
Aldi, yeah.
No kidding. Yeah, we have that too.
Aldi's a little bit more. They're more in the how do I say this? Lower cost of living parts of town.
Yeah.
And that's not a hit on Aldi. I think Aldi's great. Both my sisters love Aldi. They have great prices.
Right.
So, but yeah, I think they're more so. But I mean, to be very frank, like I do notice a huge difference going between grocery stores. Like I love the grocery store I go to. Just I don't know, something about the look of the inside, but then I realized I'm just like I'm paying out the butt. Like unless you're honestly looking for some of the discount deals, they're gonna charge you out the butt. Like for example, like a pack of soda, a 12-pack of soda will probably be like, I don't know, $7 or something like that. But then I had a deal yesterday where it was like, get this 4-pack, so like 48 cans, right? Like 4 12-packs for like $13. So it was like, I don't know, I'm not good with math, but like $2.50, $3 a piece. So I was like, well, you can't complain with that because that ends up being about 25 cents a can. So I was like, can't beat that deal, right? And it's not like some off-brand. I mean, it was like Dr. Pepper products. So I ended up getting some Squirt, Dr. Pepper, ginger ale, and whatever the last one was. But yeah, I mean, if you don't buy it with that coupon, it would probably have been like, I don't know, $30 worth of, maybe not 30, but 25 to, it would have been twice the price at least.
Right.
So I noticed those things. Like I didn't really notice it all too much until kind of the last year and a half. But there's definitely, and same thing with CVS. Like I remember one time I was driving home and I was like, oh crap, I forgot to get deodorant at the grocery store. And I went to CVS and I was like, $8 for a stick of freaking deodorant. I was like, I'm fine. Like I can last a day or two before I drive by, whatever a grocer, and the grocer charges like $4.50 or something for the same stick. It's like pretty crazy how some of these places will literally just try to rip your face off. And I don't know if part of it's just like where they are in the city.
I think it's something that I've noticed in people when gas was incredibly expensive. I don't know where it was in Houston. Granted that there's a lot of going on there. So from a logistics point of view, it doesn't take as much transportation wise to get it to where it needs to go. But here it got up to about $5.30 a gallon.
Jesus.
And I know just noticing like various places where I live. So another example would be the Walmart. The Walmart in the good side of town charges more for their products than on the bad side of town because we have 2 of them. And it's the same way with gas here. If you're in the good side of town, you're going to pay a premium. If you're on the bad side of town, it's going to be cheaper. And it made me wonder, like, obviously it's the same area, so I don't think a cost of living impact would be necessarily too much. But at the same time, it makes you wonder, right? Because I mean, I work about an hour away from home, but I work in a decent area and it's more expensive there. So it's interesting how that all works out.
I'm curious, what's going on with the gas prices now? What are they? $3.50, $3?
It's I want to say I just filled up for like $2.97. So it's
Okay, that's good. I was visiting my mom in Pennsylvania, and they're like, it was still like $4.50 a gallon. I was like, what
No
the hell's
kidding.
going on over here? Or no, it wasn't $4.50. Sorry, it was $3.90, $3.80, $3.90. Sorry. But I'm paying $2.50 down here in Houston. Like, it's crazy. And it goes back to like, we're only 40 miles from the refineries here, right? So
Fair.
it's a little bit.
People like, I mean, obviously you understand that because you work in oil and gas. I understand that because I, invest quite a bit in oil and gas. So we're keen to know stuff like that. But, the common everyday person just filling up their tank has no idea.
But I mean, even still, like, I don't understand why there needs to be $1 per gallon difference. And I'm like, how much of that is taxes in Pennsylvania? I just need to know. Like, it's pretty crazy.
Right.
Wasn't there an issue with some of the stores they had to divest? They would have had too many stores close together.
That could have been possible. I would not be surprised at all. Because like I just said, I mean, they own, obviously Kroger has Kroger stores. They have Payless, and then they have Ruler Foods, where there's two subsidiaries right there. And if they're acquiring Albertsons with their, tranche of stores, I wouldn't be surprised if that's it at all.
Huh.
Makes you wonder, but I mean, just looking at like stores like that and stuff, that's the one that I'm most impressed out of compared to like Walmart and others. And then another one that we have here, but it's private, is called Meijer. That's the one that I like the most, just because of the appeal, how it looks and whatnot. But again, because of the demographic and where it's located, you're going to pay higher prices for it. So, but you don't have to wait in those dreadful, 30-minute lines that are at your Walmarts and stuff like that. So, I mean, you're paying for better service, in my opinion.
Well, anyway, Hot Coal, we've gone down to 2 to 3 people. I don't want to keep holding you on. We're on a hold. I'm going to be sitting here in the background waiting for it to kind of launch. I'm going to get some. You know what I'm going to do, Cole, which I haven't done in probably a good couple months, is Uncle Matty is going to go get a drive-through margarita. He hasn't done that in a little bit. It used to be a Friday night special, but Uncle Matty doesn't have to work tomorrow, so he might as well. Oh, what's going on? I'm about to cut Hot Coal off.
The winds to come down during tonight's launch window for Virginia is for launch lovers. It has just gone 6:56 p.m. local time, which means we have another hour or so to be able to launch tonight. And Electron is standing by and ready to fly.
Just not looking good, Matt.
Not looking good. So anyway, don't want to hold you on if this is just going to continue to be on hold, and more than happy. I am curious though. I mean, I don't know how much time and dedication you want to have, and I know you don't have a YouTube channel, stuff like that, but I'd love to have you on for future, and then we're going to do it monthly, right? So it's not going to be like a weekly sort of thing, and I'm cool if we skip a couple months here and there too, right? If there's no new data, but would love for you to be a rather consistent guest for Rocket Lab Monthly. Hope to get Chris on next time as well, but hopefully we can kind of garner an audience for it. I'm pretty sure there's going to be a lot of people that after the fact on Twitter are going to be like, shit, like we didn't know that this was going on and yada, yada, yada. So I'm hopeful, cautiously optimistic that over the course of several months, we'll be able to continue to expand on the audience and hopefully make it a little bit more routine. And it could be something where we are able to schedule it around continuous launches. Because if there's once a month, then it might be an opportunity where we just chat kind of like this today with the opportunity to kind of hopefully see a launch every once in a while. But yeah, I don't know if you have any other quick thoughts that you want to put into the room before I shut it down, and hopefully we can meet up again next month.
No, that's about it. Just other than the fact, just once again reiterating, like, it's Rocket Lab, it's not SpaceX, totally different things, totally different ballparks. But I mean, yeah, dive deep into it. Look at their launches. Look at some of their marketing material and stuff like that. It's definitely an interesting company, especially if you're interested in deep space travel and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think what people might get a little bit hyped up about is like the potential for it being such a large total addressable market. But I think people need to recognize that, Rocket Lab isn't going to be able to get all of that. And at the same time, I think people need to recognize that I think they're not out of the woods yet. I think you hit that kind of early on in the stream where you're like, well, they got a couple $100 million worth of cash left. You and I kind of just looked earlier. They're probably at $120 to $160 million a year burn rate at the current moment. So maybe more, depending on how many more launches they do. So it's kind of curious, at what point do they kind of get to a place where they're at a income expense versus like an actual income, and being net income positive, right? And stop burning cash. So I am kind of curious when that's going to happen. Is it going to be in 23? Likely not, because of everything that's going on with Neutron. But maybe after they kind of get the first few Neutron launches under their belt, 2024, late 24, early 25. So kind of same boat that we're in with Palantir. Hopefully be able to. So hopefully they have enough runway where they're actually able to start generating some free cash going forward. But it is promising, starting to see some of the other non-launch businesses start to get some good recognition. And the hope is they continue to grow. And as we saw last year, Q3, over 1,000% revenue growth year over year. So hopefully that sort of trend persists as we go into 2023. And looking forward to chatting about it more next month. So.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, I appreciate you having me on, and yeah, absolutely. I'm definitely down,
Cool.
for future streams going over this and stuff like that. So.
Yeah, cool. Well, I appreciate it. No launch today, well, at least for now, but hopefully in the near future.
I'm sure it'll launch as soon as we end this.
They'll be like T-minus 12 minutes. I'm like, shit. All right. But it is what it is. But I appreciate it, man, and I'll talk to you soon.
Absolutely. Later.
Later, brother.